My name is Debbie Singizer, and I'm the Director of Board Services at the VSBA. And I'm delighted to have you join us this afternoon to learn about the superintendent evaluation process and how it is an opportunity for continuous learning and improvement for both superintendents and the board. Before we begin, I just want to go over quickly a few webinar logistics. Questions are always encouraged during these webinars. That's why we're here to answer them. And when you have a question, we ask that you use the Q&A box to put your question in that. We won't be using the chat box today. And the reason we ask you to do this is because then questions can remain anonymous when they are put in the Q&A box. If we run out of time and we can't get to all of the questions, and that sometimes does happen in these webinars, or if there's a question that's very specific or particular to your board or a specific case that you're facing, then we might not get to that. But what we will do is capture your question and follow up with you after the webinar by email. And of course, as always, if you think of a question or something comes up after the webinar is over, please don't hesitate to reach out to the VSBA. We're happy to answer questions, and I'll make sure you have contact information at the end. When you go off the webinar today, you will see a 3-question evaluation pop up. And it's very brief. It takes about 2 minutes to complete. And we ask that you complete it because your feedback we do read, and we take it into consideration when we plan our webinars. We always want to make them better. As you know, the webinar is being recorded, and in a couple of days, you will be receiving an email with a link to the webinar recording, the slide deck that you'll see, as well as any other resources that we refer to during the course of the webinar. So be on the lookout for that email. It usually comes out a couple of days after a webinar takes place. And as always, we keep our webinars stored under the webinar archive page, which you can find on our website under the resources tab. So that does it for the logistics. So I am very happy to be joined today by 3 other panelists who have extensive knowledge and experience with superintendent evaluation. First, we have Sandra Cameron, who many of you know. She's the VSBA Associate Executive Director and is does superintendent evaluations for the VSBA. And she's also the mastermind and the creator of the new superintendent evaluation toolkits that that we just launched this week. We're very excited about that. It went live on our website just this week, and you'll be getting an introduction to it a little bit later in this webinar. We also have Kathy Galuzzo, who's the White River Valley Supervisory Union Board Chair. And for those of you who might have heard, she's been chair for 5 years and been on her board for 17 years. So she has quite a bit of experience and knowledge. And she is joined today by her superintendent, Jamie Conarney, who has been superintendent for 5 years of the White River Valley Supervisory Union. And he, in partnership with Kathy, has been through the superintendent evaluation process for a number of years. So we are just very lucky to have them with us today, and I want to thank them for joining us. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sandra to get us started. Sandra.
Thank you, Debbie, for that kind introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. I just want to tell you, we are in a busy intersection in Montpelier, and you may hear sirens. I just heard some go by, but just in case you hear them again, everything's fine. Our hope today is that the webinar will provide a better understanding of the cycle of the superintendent evaluation and how it's connected to the school supervisory district, supervisory union, and potentially member district goals. The importance of the superintendent evaluation in regard to the board superintendent partnership, the rationale for a meaningful, systemic, fair, and transparent evaluation, opportunities for continuous improvement, and some special considerations that we want to highlight for you. And lastly, we will introduce, as Debbie said, the VSBA's new superintendent evaluation toolkit, which is full of useful resources. So let's get started. The annual evaluation process is vital to an effective school organization and an important part of the work of the board and the superintendent in partnership. The school board is responsible for defining organizational outcomes that are clearly and explicitly stated in order to ensure the superintendent understands what is expected of them and to ensure that the school board understands what to expect of the superintendent. These 2 points characterize an effective working relationship with mutual accountability. The evaluation is done with the superintendent, not to the superintendent. It's the result of reviewing data and honestly discussing strengths and areas for improvement. The board should model the behavior it expects of its superintendent and of all district employees and ensure that the superintendent receives fair, honest, and meaningful feedback through the performance review. The superintendent's evaluation is an important part of continuous improvement. The cycle starts with clearly stating the purpose and the expectations for the evaluation. The superintendent's contract should include some key information about what he or she should expect with regard to the timeline and the method for the evaluation. The next step then is to refine mutually agreed upon goals for the superintendent. And our recommendation is that at least one goal focuses on student outcomes. The goals should be written as SMART or SMARTY, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, what a SMARTY goal is. And there should be stated measurements for success. For example, how will you know if progress has been made on each of these goals? A stated process for the board to provide feedback to the superintendent throughout the year, which is sometimes referred to as a formative assessment. As part of the ongoing dialogue over the course of the school year, the board may ask the superintendent to provide updates on their progress toward goals, as well as any recommended adjustments that might need to be made due to unforeseen circumstances. The formal evaluation of the superintendent's progress, which is sometimes referred to as a summative assessment, is ideally done late winter, early spring. A system for collecting anonymous feedback from all board members, the superintendent's cabinet, which is typically the administrative team, should be in place, and the superintendent should also be asked to complete a self-assessment using the same criteria. All feedback should be summarized into a succinct report that states the mutually agreed upon goals for the following year. The formal evaluation report then should be signed by the superintendent and the board chair. And then the cycle begins again. The most effective superintendent evaluation outlines a process that's systemic, fair, transparent, and meaningful. Spend time as a board outlining the evaluation cycle and share this with the superintendent. State the purpose of the evaluation, considering situations such as having an interim superintendent or a first-year superintendent. The evaluation purpose might be quite different in these situations. Goals for an interim or first-year superintendent should be focused on a successful transition year and more narrowly on priority areas that might include topics such as community engagement, data insights, and consensus building. There may be specific goals and evaluation criteria for superintendents of career and technical education centers that may look a little bit different than traditional structures. And there may also be a slightly different evaluation method or instrument for the superintendent of a policy governance board. And Debbie's going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Be sure to review the superintendent's job description to be sure that the board's expectations are clearly articulated. Ensure that the superintendent's contract provides information about the performance evaluation, especially with regard to what method and the timing of the evaluation, and whether or not the superintendent will be asked to do a self-evaluation. I wanted to note here that all of this information in terms of the timeline, the process, the instrument, all of this, the board and superintendent would discuss in an open session. Okay. There are several important considerations for the board with regard to the superintendent evaluation. The SUSD board should be given the opportunity and encouraged to provide feedback, everybody on the board. The superintendent should identify their admin team to provide feedback, and that's often the principals, director of student support, curriculum director, facilities, business manager, that cabinet that I mentioned before. All respondents should be assured that feedback is anonymous, and then when the report is written up, also attempts made to keep that anonymity. Only those with the closest connection to the work of the superintendent should be asked to provide feedback in this process. We'll talk a little bit later about strategies for collecting feedback from others. The nationally recognized professional standards for educational leaders are well known and well respected. The VSBA's evaluation rubric is based on these standards. By using the same evaluation instrument year over year, the board and the superintendent can compare feedback and look for trends. By having the superintendent complete the same evaluation survey as the board and the admin team, you can look for consistency in performance areas and where there might be disagreement between groups. If disagreement occurs, it could be an indication that the expectations are not clearly stated or understood. So there's a lot of reflection to do through this process. Best practice is for the superintendent to be included in as much of the evaluation as possible. This provides transparency and also builds trust. Obviously, the board may want to discuss feedback from the survey instrument, look for common themes, develop possible goal areas before meeting with the superintendent. In terms of timing, we have found we use a survey that goes out through SurveyMonkey, and we have found it most effective to leave that survey open for about 10 to 14 days. We do a reminder when there's just a few days left, and then we may need to extend that timing, and it just depends on holidays, weekends, sort of thing. A few questions that the board might want to discuss as a group. Will the ratings from all three respondent groups be averaged together and or disaggregated for deeper analysis? And how will a summary report be written when some board members score high ratings on the superintendent's performance and others score lower? How will all voices be represented in the evaluation report? What happens when respondents say completely opposite things? Will you use a consultant or do you have a central office person who'll collect and summarize the evaluation feedback? How can the process be protected from internal bias? When the final evaluation report has been written, what process will the board use to review and approve it? If the evaluation informs an annual decision on the superintendent's contract, when will the board do that? And how will the superintendent receive the information? And lastly, best practice is for the board to complete a self-evaluation of its process and performance for the annual superintendent evaluation. This information can be used to improve the process for the next year.
Sandra,
Yes.
before we move on, there is a question that I think could be answered right now so that this person can have a frame of reference in their mind as we move forward. So the question is, we have a school SDs, which I think are school districts within a larger SU. Should the school district boards do evaluations, or is it just done at the SU level?
So best practice would be to coordinate that evaluation at the SU level and have participation for all the member districts. I see Kathy shaking your head. Do you want to describe how that works for your district, Kathy? Your SU?
Yeah, we do we have the same setup, several school districts under one supervisory union. And we do the superintendent evaluation at the full board level and members. So we form a committee at the beginning of when all the elections and stuff are done, and we know who our board members are, and we appoint our officers and whatnot for different things. We select committees then, so you can choose to be on the superintendent evaluation committee to represent your district if you choose to.
Thanks, Debbie, for highlighting that. As the board begins the evaluation cycle, it's important to come from a mindset of continuous improvement. Oh, Jamie.
And just so folks know, though, the survey goes out to every one of our 31 board members.
Yes. Every board member
I think
gives
it's
feedback.
very important. Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
That's all.
Absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that. Really important. Yes. Okay. The board's process for superintendent evaluation can be somewhat iterative in that the board takes into account any lessons learned from previous evaluations for improving its own process in the next cycle. Be sure that the board and superintendent have established mutually agreed upon goals. Establish a plan to receive updates on progress throughout the year, as we mentioned. Establish the instrument that'll be used to record and respond to those updates. And commit to iterative improvements and update the superintendent's contract if changes happen that need to be reflected in the contract. So just as a reminder to keep things above the board, as the board embarks on the superintendent evaluation process, it should consider good governance, requirements that are outlined in law and in rules. DQS is one of them. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Any SU or SD policy that's in place references the evaluation of the superintendent and the language in the superintendent's contract. Okay, so in terms of good governance, at this time, I'd like to invite Jamie and Kathy again to share about your process.
Kathy, you want to start? I'll fill in anything, or do you want me to start?
I can start. We started doing the formal process with the VSBA about, I think we're on our 5th year, right, Sandra?
I believe so.
5th year. Which as I stated before, I've been a board member for a long time and we weren't using a real formal process. So we started working with the VSB on this and it's been amazing. All of our board members really appreciate it. They feel like they're informed and we're staying on top of things. I reach out to Sandra usually every year and say we need to get the process started. We have a meeting with her, survey, and from there we look at what the questions are, look at the past surveys, we send them out to all of the board members and Jamie for a self-evaluation and all of the administrative people that work with him. It's out for 10 to 14 days, and we're actually currently in the process right now. We're going to be finishing up next week. The surveys come back, we have an opportunity to look at it, and then we meet again with Sandra and Jamie, and come up with, go over the evaluation and come up with goals for the next year. Anything else you want to add, Jamie?
No, you did a great job, Kathy. What I would say is we did change our timing up a little bit this year. We were doing it more toward, it was happening more in like the March, April time, and we were finding a lot of our new board members were just entering in, and we were asking them to do an evaluation, and they didn't have a lot of experience necessarily on the board or what my goals were and how my goals align to our strategic plan and the SU board goals. So we this year we did it in December, and I found that I definitely felt like I received more useful information from all board members because they had at least been on the board, at least 6 months. So not that we don't have a significant turnover actually here, which I'm really pleased by, but I do think the timing now is such that we're kind of on a calendar year schedule where I think that my goals will actually be for 2025. And then I'll progress monitor throughout, and then the board will evaluate me again in November, December. So I have appreciated how we've adjusted the timeline.
That's great. Thanks for providing all that really useful information. Collective authority is an important concept in this process. The superintendent works for the board as a whole, not 2 or 3 or 5 separate individuals. And therefore, it's important for the board to speak with one voice throughout the evaluation process, which should conclude with a consensus document. If agreement cannot be reached on some of the wording, the majority rules, as with any board decision. Consensus development may require a good deal of time and discussion, so be sure to allot enough time to have an effective process and a well-developed document. Okay, well, we are on what does your policy say? There it is. The VSBA provides a model policy, it's A24, that addresses the board superintendent relationship. And within that model policy, there's language that states annually, the board evaluates the superintendent's performance. The superintendent is accountable to the school board for achieving the board's goals, and the board is responsible for clearly setting forth and communicating its expectations before the evaluation takes place. The board will evaluate the superintendent's job performance in a way that is systematic, fair, and effective. So that language is right out of the model policy. And I wonder, Jamie and Kathy, did you adopt this model policy? It's a recommended. You do have it. Have you found it helpful at all?
I have, at least as a superintendent.
Wonderful. Great. Okay, and then during the cycle, Debbie, I believe this is your slide.
It is. So board members can and should ask the superintendent to report on progress throughout the year. We suggest quarterly. Meanwhile, the superintendent can and should be monitoring their own progress and talking to the board about any adjustments that may be needed due to unforeseen circumstances. So it's really about having a conversation. and a conversation that should go quite well if the relationship between the board and the superintendent is a healthy one. And when I say healthy, I mean one that's based on mutual respect and trust. Remember that a board and a superintendent together form the governance team, so they should always be working in partnership together to ensure good governance happens. At the end of the cycle, following the review and the analysis of the feedback that's collected from the board members and the admin team, the full board or the evaluation committee, whichever the case may be, meets in a closed session to discuss the findings. Here is when we want to identify some themes or commonalities or incongruencies, which Sandra spoke about at the beginning, that can occur between different groups, like between the board and the admin team, or maybe even within a group of respondents. This is a good time to discuss possible goal areas, and that will be included in the final evaluation documents. The board chair or designee then creates a summary document that is reviewed and approved by the full board. Following the distribution of the final document to all parties, the board and superintendent will meet to discuss the evaluation, and ultimately the chair and the superintendent will sign it. Following the completion of an evaluation cycle, a self-evaluation by the board, when it has a chance to reflect on its own role during the superintendent evaluation process, can be quite helpful in identifying some important lessons or things that they could do differently the next time they are doing a superintendent evaluation. So these lessons learned should be captured and recorded somewhere and then referred to the following year when the next cycle begins and a superintendent evaluation is required. It's really all about the board's continuous learning and performance improvement and things that will help make a board more effective and ultimately highly effective.
What I wanted to provide to you here was some language that the VSBA and the VSA provides in a template for a superintendent contract. So by law, 16 VSA 241 says that each SUSD will employ a superintendent through a written contract, and that by May 15th each year will meet to review or act otherwise on that contract. So you'll notice in the statute, it doesn't explicitly say evaluate each year. It implies there's an evaluation happening. What's happening right now is the district quality standards that have been approved and will go into effect July 1st, 2025. They do require an annual evaluation of the superintendent. So here's an excerpt for you that could be language used in a superintendent contract. And it highlights a couple of key points, which includes the date and the process, the instrument that will be used. So you could include as much specific information as you can into that contract, and then there's nothing left to question about what the superintendent should expect.
Back to me. So by now, you have hopefully at least heard of and are familiar with the district quality standards that take effect this summer. But as a quick review, in 2023, the Vermont Agency of Education adopted the state's first district quality standards known as Rule Series 100. DQS, more commonly known as DQS, aims at improving school district quality as a means to support the state's goal that is set forth in statute. And that is that all Vermont children will be afforded educational opportunities that are substantially equal in quality and enable them to achieve or exceed the education quality standards approved by the State Board of Education. So as you've heard before, hopefully, there are three categories of standards in DQS. The governance standards are those that we as school board members will be responsible for implementing. Now, within the governance standards, there are three types of standards, or what we sometimes refer to as buckets. Those are priorities, protocols, and processes. The superintendent evaluation falls under the governance priorities bucket, where there is a standard that reads, and it's quoted up here, at least annually, the board formally evaluates the performance of the superintendent based in part on the superintendent's progress toward meeting agreed upon goals. So in sum, starting in fiscal year 26, when DQS takes effect, all boards will be responsible for evaluating their superintendent at least annually.
Thanks, Debbie. Opportunities for continuous improvement. We've mentioned this along the way. Improving requires feedback, fair, honest, open feedback about performance based on a clear definition of roles and responsibilities and specific goals. The DQS rating scale, when it is finalized, will provide us with a roadmap for continuous improvement for the evaluation of the superintendent. Boards can use the evaluation to enhance communication with the superintendent, and it's an important leadership tool to focus and align all district efforts and to talk about where the district's going, not just this year, but with an eye toward the future. Some superintendents have never been evaluated, others maybe intermittently, and still others have a very predictable, systematic evaluation every single year. Without a strong evaluation process, the superintendent and the board can't mark a clear path for the work to be accomplished. Process of superintendent evaluation also models the value of performance assessments for the entire district. Sometimes a path forward toward a goal will require the superintendent or the board to pivot or change course. And it's important for the board to stay in tune with those changes, what they look like and where they might be leading the district next. And Jamie and Kathy, I wanted to invite you to talk about the alignment between your board goals and your superintendent goals. And if you'd like me to show them, I could try to do that, or you can describe. It's up to you.
You can probably describe. I don't know, Sandra, if you have to show it, but if folks are interested and they reach out, I'm happy to share them with so that they can see the attunement. Do you want to start, Kathy, and then I'll jump in?
No, I'll let you go first this time. It's your turn.
Okay. So I would say, one of the things that I think have led to a really successful relationship here at WRVSU is this piece of attunement. So one, we're really clear about the importance of strategic planning. So we call our strategic plan a roadmap for success. And what you would see is that the board's goals and my professional goals are in alignment with our strategic plan as well. So there's like a third piece to this for us, is that, we're consistently progress monitoring, reviewing to ensure that the work we're doing aligns to our strategic plan and our communications and outreach plan. So if you were to look at the board's goals and my goals, what you would see is that in general, the board's goals are very focused on the work of the board in regards to supporting me and fulfilling my goals. And then if you were to look at my professional goals, those go in alignment with us moving forward in regards to meeting the objectives of our strategic plan. So I have felt that it's done a really good job of keeping us really consistent on the important work that we've articulated in the strategic plan. And I'm sure Kathy could speak to, like, our board's work now is very focused on measuring the progress in regards to the ends of the strategic plan. And we are expected as an administrative team and we also adopt a data calendar at the start of the year so that the board knows when they're going to receive progress monitoring reports on our academic, social, emotional, and other end goals the board has set for us to meet every 3 years. So, it's predictable, and the board knows that at board meetings, they're going to receive reports on a monthly basis in regards to how the admin team and myself are working towards meeting those goals. So there's no surprises.
Yeah, I agree with all that Jamie said, and this kind of gives us it's like a roadmap for us to keep us on task, and we find that our goals align very well with the superintendent's goals because a lot of our philosophies are the same, and we work really hard to talk out what we want to be our goals and how that can help move us forward. So that's how we come up with those goals. But it's a really great roadmap for us, and we've been very successful with it.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I agree that third element of the strategic plan, your vision, right? It's represented in all of your work. Great. There are a couple of special considerations we just wanted to highlight for you today. Superintendents of technical career and technical education centers, there may be goals or measurement tools that address regional needs. So there may be really specific evaluation pieces and elements and considerations in a structure, an SU that is a career center. We talked a little bit about first year superintendents focusing really on a successful transition year. And then Debbie next is going to be talking about some considerations for the evaluation of a superintendent who is part of a policy governance board. And this might look a little bit different than a traditional board. In the first year of the superintendent, best practice is to focus on a successful transition. This evaluation could serve as a baseline for future evaluation. And here's a few tips. Board superintendents could align the goals to the professional standards for educational leaders. I mentioned earlier that the VSBA's rubric is aligned with these standards. They're very familiar to superintendents, so they're, ready to use these standards to develop goals, and it could be done in partnership with the board. The board could also make the superintendent's entry plan, which is often the first 100 days as a superintendent, the basis for the first evaluation, and then ask questions such as, how did that transition plan go? Were they able to accomplish it? What did they learn from that? Are they able to now set reasonable goals for the next year based on reflection of that first 100 days? And then also important to note, the most common recommendation is to have no more than 2 to 5, I would say 2 to 4 even, goals that are outlined, with one of those goals focusing on student outcomes, as I mentioned. That does not mean that the superintendent's only focusing on 2 to 5 things. It just means that you are intentionally measuring the progress and evaluating on those goals each year. Okay, so I wanted to give you, I collected these from a colleague who does a lot of support for new superintendents and transitioning superintendents. I'm going to run through fairly quickly for you possible goal areas when your superintendent is in their first year, and then you'll have this information on these slides so you can read it more carefully. I mentioned 3 areas that could be focused on in that first transition year, and the first one was community engagement. So there could be goals around building relationships, summarizing feedback from internal and external community members, clarifying a communication agreement within the district with the board, developing a communication strategy for the district, the SUSD, and then establishing goals for the next school year. And then in the area of data insights, goals could focus on areas such as gathering and reviewing data, using data literacy skills to identify patterns and changes in student performance, and possibly always ensuring transparent, accurate, and accessible financial information that's available so that there are sound to inform decision-making. And then the third area for first year, or interim, potentially superintendents, is around consensus building. And goal areas could include things like modeling positive leadership, making sure to highlight shared values and goals when managing challenging situations, sharing factual information transparently, and clearly communicating the district or SU's vision. So again, you can come back to those. They'll be available in the slides. But one thing I wanted to be sure to talk about is that I often am asked about collecting feedback from staff beyond the admin team and from the community more broadly. And what I want to share here is that the board members and the admin team really are the group who understand and are most closely connected to the superintendent's work. So if you think about a circle of influence or a circle of knowledge, board members and the admin team are the folks who have the most information about what happens every single day and what the responsibilities are of the superintendent. Parents, community members, staff are on another tier out. And so very difficult for them to be able to use the same type of evaluation to provide meaningful feedback. More appropriate for those folks would be something called a climate survey. And certainly the board could ask the superintendent to issue and solicit feedback through a climate survey and come back and report back. But I will tell you, even within that dark blue circle that's closest to the superintendent, board members and admin teams sometimes respond to our rubric survey with, I don't have enough information So that is why we really recommend that this close evaluation happens with board members and admin team. And Jamie and Kathy, I wanted to ask you if you have a method for collecting feedback from educators in the community more broadly.
You know, we do a lot of different school district climate surveys and things, and we also do collect feedback in regards to how we're progressing at the district level in regards to meeting our strategic plan. I would say that is where we would collect greater feedback from the community. But in regards to formally saying that it's feedback specific to the role of the superintendent, that's not something that we've ventured into at this point. Beyond the actual admin team across the WRVSU. Kathy, would you agree or have anything else to add to that part?
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. We do the surveys that we do to track where we're at on different things, but we haven't done anything specifically to the superintendent. But I think I feel that the board members and the administrative team are the ones that could the survey that we do wouldn't make sense to try to get feedback from the broader community. They wouldn't know the answers.
Thank you. And certainly DQS has a lot of opportunity, I'll call it, for soliciting community feedback. So there will be lots of ways to get that information.
So for those of you that don't know, policy governance is a trademarked governance system that was created in the 1970s by John and Miriam Carver. It is a different system of governance from traditional governance, and it needs to be formally adopted by a board. And a handful of boards in Vermont, a handful of school boards in Vermont have adopted policy governance. I'm not sure if there's any policy governance board members or superintendents in this webinar right now, so I don't want to take a lot of time focusing on superintendent evaluation in this situation. But I do want to say that superintendent evaluations are done differently in a district that uses policy governance as its governance model. And they are done largely, and in some cases exclusively, using the policy monitoring reports that the superintendent or CEO submits to the board throughout the year, kind of like a formative assessment, if you will. For more information about superintendent evaluation with the Policy Governance Board, I would invite you to reach out to the VSBA, to me specifically, because we have covered this topic with policy governance boards just last year, actually, during one of our programs. And we're happy to repeat the training again this year for policy governance boards if they feel they need it. But I do want to underscore that whatever method a board chooses to use in terms of its governance model, that it explicitly is stated in the superintendent's contract, that it's referenced. If it is a policy governance board, that is mentioned somewhere in the contract of the superintendent. So it's very clear what process of evaluation will be utilized. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and have Sandra share hers, because the next slide, or the next part of the webinar, is a brief introduction and overview of the new toolkit that we referenced at the beginning, the superintendent evaluation toolkit that went live just this week, and that you all will have access to, or should already have access to.
Thanks, Debbie. Can you see that homepage? Okay. What I'm hoping is as I click, it will also, you'll see the, I'm not sure. Anyway, let me just show you. Oh, it is going to work. Perfect. So here's our homepage. If you hover over the toolkits and go down to Superintendent Evaluation Toolkit, is it going to change? Yes, here it is. Just launched on Tuesday. Thanks to Amy. She's on the call with us for all of her hard work to get this up and going for us. So there's a lot of basic information here, a lot of what we've covered today. And then you'll see here in the resources, a whole lot of clickable links for more information. So as you embrace continuous improvement around the superintendent's evaluation, please know we are here to help. This new toolkit provides boards with access to the evaluation rubric we've been referencing, sample reports, sample language for entering into executive session, protecting confidential information, outlining the charge of an evaluation committee, and also developing SMART and more recently a new term called SMARTY goals. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And you'll also see the link for the VSBA's board self-evaluation can be done after this process is complete. So let me just show you quickly. A lot of this is just PDF, but here's some sample language around establishing the committee, communication and confidentiality, potential motion to enter into executive session, and then the guidance about when you come out of executive session. What I don't know is how can I go back? Are you seeing the resources again? Okay, perfect. Here's the rubric, and the next slide shows you an example, but there's a one-page intro that talks about the purpose, the background, and how to use this rubric. It's a rating scale, again, based on those professional standards for educational learning. When the VSBA helps to facilitate an evaluation, we turn this into SurveyMonkey survey. 1 through 4 is a rating. All the quantitative data comes back, and we also provide an opportunity for qualitative data in each of the 6 evaluation areas. Now available to you here online. Here's some sample reports. When you click in there, you'll see there's some a structure to the report and some prompts for you to fill things in if you decide to use that. The summary report would be really summarizing all the information that came back, and then that final evaluation report is much more succinct, and that's what the superintendent and the board chair would sign off on. The SMARTY goal handout is here. So SMART goals, you may have heard before. You can see this okay? The graph, there it goes. You see that? Okay. SMART goals stand for being specific, so clearly what is going to get done. Being measurable, ways to track the progress. Attainable, so making sure those goals are realistic and possible to achieve. Relevant, so aligned to the board's goals and the superintendent's goals, and speaking to the vision and the strategic plan. Time-oriented, so there's a clear end date. And then some boards are working more intentionally now to address equity and inclusion. And so that's the IE at the end of a SMART goal. So here you've got some examples of some SMARTY goals and how you would break down specific goal into each of those categories. So that is a resource for you. We will upload the recording and the slides from today. And then here's the board's self-evaluation. Oh, it brought you to the website. We'll fix that link. That's okay. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing because there we go. Perfect. Those are all available to you now as members. So they're up on our website. Please reach out if you have any questions or if you think something's missing, you'd like to see something else, please let us know. Brand new, so we will continue to improve. And I think, Debbie, that I showed the rubric, but let's go to that next slide. Do you want to go back to sharing?
Sure.
So the 6 areas that the VSBA's evaluation rubric focus on, again, aligning with those professional standards, the 6 areas are board superintendent relationship, policy, business and finance, community relations, operational management and leadership, and instructional leadership. And then you can see within each of those. So for example, this little excerpt is board and superintendent relationship, and it's got operating results and interpersonal skills, but there are many under each of the 6. In total, the survey is 40 questions. Plus, we recommend inserting the superintendent's goals so that you can collect feedback on progress toward those goals. So a complete survey could be up to 45 questions. Okay, I think we've shared a lot of information, new tools for you, and we're wondering what questions you have for any of the panelists today.
So Sandra, I'm going to jump in unless, am I talking over you? I apologize. But there is one that's relevant to what you just covered, and that is the toolkit. Somebody's asking, is the toolkit still applicable to school districts that have a policy governance structure?
Do you want to answer that? Or do you want me to?
If you could, that'd be great.
Sure, sure. So I think a lot of these resources are going to be applicable, right? All of that sample language around executive session and confidentiality, all of that is totally the same. The rubric, what I would say is look at the contract, the superintendent's contract, and see if there's language in there about what the evaluation is supposed to cover, or what instrument might be used, because you certainly want to be sure in practice that you're aligning what you're doing with what you have agreed to, with the superintendent. And be sure to communicate if it's not in the contract. Talk with the superintendent about what the evaluation purpose and process is going to look like and what tool that will be. So the rubric, it depends. You're going to have to navigate that a little bit about what has already been discussed and agreed to. Sample reports, the same. I think you could use a lot of the language in there, and it's organized in the 6 areas that I mentioned, but a lot of policy governance policies that are reported through monitoring reports also align with those 6 areas. So I think you could find those sample reports really useful. Smarty goals, of course, absolutely. So yes, I think a lot of those resources could be used with policy governance boards.
Another question is, when the VSBA is hired to do the superintendent evaluation service, does the VSBA act as a facilitator in the process? And can you explain a little bit more the role? And is that service available to any board?
Sure. So I'll talk about that, and then I'd love to hear Jamie and Kathy from your perspective, if you've got more to add. So the service of superintendent evaluation is available to any of our member boards, and everyone in the state is a member board. There is a fee. It has been $1,500, and it's going to $2,000 in 2025. Anyone with a contract will be covered for the $1,500. We wouldn't go back on any of that. And that process, yes, starts with, I consider it really board development initially, talking to the board about the process, the timeline, the tools, the importance of including the superintendent along the way, goal development. And it also includes then setting up the survey, issuing the survey, analyzing the data, summarizing the data, and then helping the board to facilitate those conversations moving forward. Sometimes there's a little bit more support depending on what the board needs. Sometimes I've done some additional supports around writing SMART goals. So it can certainly be customized. What would you add, Jamie or Kathy? Have I left anything out?
For me, no, I think you covered it perfectly. I think our board, when we started doing this the first time, and we voted to pay to have the VSBA help us with it, we're really looking for a direction and how to do the superintendent survey effectively, and we've decided to stick with the process and do this with you every year. It's we like the way that you help us track it, and um, the process just seems to flow this way with us really well. We have the history of the evaluations each year, and we're doing it exactly the same way so that we can compare. Anything else, Jamie?
No, I just think it's been great to have a third party too to collect the data and summarize and analyze it. So I've appreciated that.
I heard that feedback. Sometimes a neutral party is super helpful. Hopefully that answers the question.
Another question is about conducting the survey. Does that include all board members only? And shouldn't it include all school staff and possibly community members as well? I know you touched upon this, Sandra, and I don't know if you want to take this question or defer to Jamie or Kathy.
Can you go back to that slide with the
Sure.
circles? And I'll say succinctly as I can, and then feel free, Kathy and Jamie, to jump in if you want to. The evaluation survey tool that we have been using is best answered by those closest to the superintendent's work. And that's the board, every board member. And then the admin team and the superintendent themselves often does a self-evaluation as well. The tool that we use would be very difficult for parents, community members, and staff to answer because it's very specific to those expectations, professional expectations of educational leaders. And as you get further away from the work of the superintendent, most folks know less about what the superintendent is expected to do and is doing. And so most commonly, feedback from parents, community members, and other staff is better done through a climate survey or other surveys, but not directly through this type of evaluation process.
Great. We have another question. How does the board get insight into the superintendent's work as an instructional leader? Very good question.
That is a great question. I would love Jamie and Kathy to answer that one. If you're comfortable.
I would say through achieving the goals that we set and the feedback from everybody that does the survey that the goals are being achieved.
Yeah, I think, you know, our board meetings are very focused on student achievement. It's either policy work, which we consider our budget, our biggest policy document, but it's either policy work or it's really focused on progress monitoring our strategic plan, and it's focused on student achievement data, both in social emotional and academic. And we start every meeting with a celebration of learning. So, you know, certainly I think the board has gotten a good feel about in regards to where we're headed instructionally. And I think, you know, their expectation is that I'm able to speak at all different levels of the organization in regards to what we're doing at the system level, and both academically and socially and emotionally. So I think through those reports, the board gets a really good sense on my work as an instructional leader. And then also all administrators report out on our 3 top goals within our strategic plan, which our strategic plans and revision for next year, and that will be one of my professional goals that we'll look at as a board and superintendent next week. But it's on our proficiency-based learning and curricular goal within the strategic plan. It's on our multi-tiered system of supports goal. And then it's on our community outreach and making certain that we're creating interdependence across the supervisory union. So they get progress monitoring reports, written reports, both at the SU level and at each district level every month. So, you know, that gives them a really good sense of what I'm doing in regards to my work as a superintendent in regards to leading us toward achievement of those goals. So they're essentially progress monitoring our strategic plan monthly, both at the superintendent level, the curriculum coordinator level, director of student support level, and our principal level.
Wonderful. Thank you both for taking that question. And there's one comment. It's not a question, but somebody wanted to say that they also have used the VSBA to conduct their evaluation, their superintendent evaluation last year, and it was very worthwhile. So thank you for that compliment. And I know Sandra does a great job. She's been doing this for how many years, Sandra?
In this capacity with the VSBA 3, I think, but as a former administrator, you know, I have a lot of experience doing evaluation using rubrics and standards. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, she does a great job. And I think this tool reflects that as well. And I'm hoping that you all will have a chance to, after this webinar, go to that page and take a look at the toolkit. We are really excited about it. We'd love your feedback on it. Any ways you think we could improve it, any suggestions you have, we would welcome those, right, Sandra?
Absolutely. Please never hesitate to reach out.
So we do not have any more questions coming in at this point. So Sandra, do you want to do a formal thank you to our presenters, and then I'll take us home.
Absolutely. Huge thank you to Jamie and Kathy for joining us today, for being true partners and collaborating with us and sharing all of your experience and knowledge. We truly appreciate it.
I'll echo that. Thank you both, Jamie and Kathy, very much. And as I said at the beginning, if you get off this webinar and you have a question that occurs to you afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out to the VSBA. I will probably defer it over to Sandra, but here's how you can reach us. And we just thank you all for joining us today. And we wish you, again, a happy new year and look forward to seeing you at future webinars.
Thank you for all of your work, everyone.